Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Okay, well, let's go if you've got that. I'll go set it up upstairs, okay?
So I'm here to ask a question. I know everyone hates to answer questions, but what is your favorite color? Purple, green,
Lavender. Okay, interesting.
green. That's
Orange.
my tribe right there.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of answers around here. I love it. Orange, can't, of course. What's your favorite fruit?
Grapes. Strawberries. What else we got? Raspberry. That's a good one.
Does anyone like bananas?
That's fewer than I thought. Interesting. Okay.
After coffee sign.
Not doing it.
I'm not really sure what else to say. I'm here to entertain. If there's anything you want to talk about, I'm here for it.
Favorite animal? A dog. Okay, for me, I think I would pick cat. I have a cat at home. It's my baby.
So, are you a cat person or a dog person? I'm a cat person. I have a cat at home, and that's my baby. I love her so much.
We've also got Team Cat over here. What about you, Sarah?
Dog.
Okay. Why?
Really? Cats don't like me? Maybe that's what it is?
Thought some cats liked you. No?
No, not really.
That's my cat. I thought my cat liked her. It's 3, tabby cat. Oh my god, so cute. Just adorable. Loves to hunt. And she likes to she puts up a fight with my roommate's cat sometimes, so we gotta keep the kids separate so that they're not at each other. But so sweet to people, just absolutely loves people. Meets a new person, gives them a little sniff, and just snuggles right in.
So, we're going to do our part, and then you guys can get back up there and do yours.
Why, hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, friends. Eyes on me. I'm watching you. Come on. Hello, everyone. So good to have you here. Are we good?
Yay.
We love to see it. So, you all know about the NTID presenter series, right? I see some blank stares. I mean, NPS stands for NTID presenter series, which is right up here on my slide. So, obviously, we have a special guest. What is March? What is this month? Yeah, it's Women's History Month.
That's right. So we do have another NTID presenter series next. Oh, actually, we have 2 more left. One in April in the SDC. It's for the Asian Deaf Club, and then for Wolk. And that is both Thursdays in 2 weeks from now.
Ground rules. Please do not talk to one another during the presentation. Please keep the room clean. If you have trash, please throw it away. We're old enough to take care of our trash, right? Please be respectful of each other. If you have a question, or if somebody has a question, please listen to that person's question and maintain respect.
And I just want to clarify the process for Q&A. During the Q&A session, we will have our staff in blue shirts standing at the end of the aisles to monitor for who has a question, and then we'll make sure that that is signed. We want to have fair access, and so we want to moderate those questions. Also, I was told, correct me if I'm wrong, during her presentation she might ask you some questions. So at that point, please follow those prompts and procedures and raise your hand and make sure that everyone is being seen so we can all take turns, okay?
Another thing, please sign slowly because we're going to have somebody up here copy signing, and we want to make sure that we're understanding everything and that the interpreters are able to follow everything as well.
Okay. So we'd like to introduce our group up here, please. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Sarah Morgenthal. I am the president of Doves, and the goal of Doves is to support women and women's rights, really just for people of the same gender, but not of the same gender, everyone working together and interacting and making sure that we have connections.
Hi everyone, my name's Amanda. This is my name sign. I'm the vice president and treasurer of Doves. Really, I just want to echo what Sarah said. Doves is supposed to be a safe space for women identifying people, and for allies to come together to talk about women's rights and other things regarding women and to just build our community.
Hi, my name is Bella. I'm excited to be the coordinator for Doves, and as I'm echoing is what they said too, and welcome Rachel to the stage. Do you want to go first? Okay.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Rachel Burton, but people call me Rach. I am so thrilled to be here tonight, and I am so grateful for Doves that you have given me the opportunity to come here and meet you. I've never been to Rochester before, so I hear this is a great, beautiful, sunny day, a wonderful time to be here. So I do have some notes that I will be glancing at from time to time, so please be patient with me as I'm back and forth between center stage and podium. So I'm here partially because it's Women's History Month, and I'm also kind of on my own journey to figure out what I want to share with the world via social media, right? I create content on social media. I'm sure most of you have seen me on social media platforms. So I want to talk a little bit tonight about why I'm doing that, and just to explain who I am as a person, right? I'm a woman, I'm a deaf woman, and that's what I want to share with you tonight. So I want to ask you a few questions, and keep your eyes out for that, okay? I have bracelets, and I have learned that sometimes that makes noise when I sign, so I'm going to go ahead and take those off. All right. Feeling a little naked up here, but wrists are bare. Okay. So as far as growing in the unknown, right? That's where I see most of the growth happening, is in the unknown. When we are in comfortable and familiar environments, often growth doesn't happen. When we go out into the unknown, that's where we can grow, and that's what I want to talk about tonight. So, my interview questions for tonight. Who are you, Rach? I will explain who I am. So, I'm a woman. I am a mom of 2 children. I have an 8-year-old boy who's deaf and a 6-year-old girl who's hearing. I was born deaf to a deaf family. I have an older brother who is hearing. He's a CODA. So, I also work full-time in marketing. And I work for a deaf-owned, women-owned company called Dezanu. And that is in Austin, Texas. And so I worked there full time from where I grew up in Maryland and Virginia, and then I moved to Washington, D.C. And so that area is called DMV, D.C., Maryland, Virginia area, and that's where I grew up. I grew up in a mainstreamed environment, And when I got to high school, I decided that I wanted to embrace my deaf identity a little bit, so I went to MSSD, and then I went to Gallaudet for my bachelor's degree in sociology. I've always been fascinated by people, and I'm always curious about group dynamics, how people are interacting with each other within groups and between groups. So I got my degree in sociology, and then I got my master's in media, culture, and communications from NYU in New York City. So I lived in New York City for 2 years, but this is my first time in Rochester. So that's like the job interview answer to the question of who I am. I know people love photos, so here's some photos of my people. So the column furthest to the left over there is work. Most of us are in my picture. I miss my team so much. Before I worked there, I was a stay-at-home mom, and before I sort of jumped into the world of social media, I was like housewife, mother. I'm now divorced, and so then I became a single mom, and I had to figure out something to do with work. So as I was in the process of finding a job, I got this opportunity, was interviewed, and honestly fell in love with it. And I feel really lucky that I got to be a part of this. Because the process of finding a job is not always great, but for me, I felt really fortunate that I had that stability. That was something that helped me in many other avenues of my life. So having that professional stability was really important to me. And so the next columns are my children. So I said that I work full-time, I raise children, I'm a content creator, I have a tiny, tiny bit of free time, and with said free time, I like to volunteer. So I'm on the board of DWU, which is Deaf Women United, and that's an organization focused on advocacy and resources for deaf women in the United States, but all over the world too. So I'm on the board for that. I also do some volunteer work for maybe you've heard of it before. It's Deaf Artisan Market Day, DAMD, and that is something else that's in Austin, Texas. And they have events in DC and LA and a few other places. And so I volunteer as there in Frederick, where I live. So I'm also the president of my university sorority alumni association. And so that's something that I don't mind, being a part of and giving back to in some ways. So the question was, who am I? But I'm not sure if you've noticed, all of my answers had to do with who I am to other people, right? I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a mother, I'm an employee, I'm a volunteer. I am something to others, but I didn't really answer the question about who I am separate from the other people in my life. And I do have an answer to that question, but I didn't really know how to answer that. All of my life, as a woman specifically, the goal was to do things for other people and to focus on myself last. And because of that, I kind of lost who I was. And so if you asked me a couple of years ago, I would say I'm a mother. At the time I had a husband. And honestly, I would have a hard time thinking about what else to say. And because I started thinking about who I am separate from other people, that began my journey of, trying to figure out who I am and being happy with myself and confident. So when people ask you, who are you? Challenge yourself to think about it as who you are, but not in relation to other people. So I'm going to try to answer that question now for myself. I am a writer. I am a content creator. I am an oversharer. I tend to share way more information. I'm a poet. I am an artist. I'm a marketer. I am a creative person, right? Those are elements of who I am that have nothing to do with other people. So that's something that I want you to start thinking about for yourselves as well. And if that's something that, if you find something about yourself that you don't really like, challenge yourself to think differently about it. So we just thought about that question, who are you? I also want to ask, why are you? Why are you here? What are we doing here? So that question, why? This is my why. This is a picture of me from when I was 4 years old. Sorry, that's my aunt and cousin right there. So this is from when I was 4. You can see me starting to get little freckles on my face. And so this is my why. That little girl in me is still there, still needs to feel safe, still needs to feel loved, still needs to feel valued. So everything I do and everything I say is for her. I want her to feel loved, and I want her to know that all of her dreams can come true, right? And I want her to know that she's the reason that I'm up here. She's my why. So your inner child doesn't necessarily have to be your why, but mine is mine. There are different reasons that we, become who we are. We have to be brave because of trauma, or, this is just where things started for me. Because later, and very recently, I learned about my neurodiversity, which is something that I'll abbreviate ND, neurodivergence. I'm sure you all have seen that term before, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but neurodivergence. I've always been neurodivergent, but I didn't know that about myself until recently. So this little girl had those issues, but didn't know it, right? She always felt like there was a part of her that was missing or didn't fit in with certain situations, with society, with social situations, with how to navigate group dynamics. And that was something that I always struggled with as a kid. I always felt kind of behind the curve. And so then later I realized that I was neurodivergent, and that was something that allowed me to see things differently. I wasn't behind, and so I want to go back and tell this little girl that she's exactly fine the way she is. Okay. So there's a reason for this picture. I want you to keep that in mind. Next, I want to talk about labels. Labels can be great. They can also be not so great. For me, labels have been really helpful. It is human nature that we label people, right? We want to put people in a box, and that helps us make sense of things. And so there's a lot out there saying that labels are bad. In my whole life, I've had people label me weird, awkward, different, quiet, shy, so many different labels, but that's not necessarily who I am, but I've still been labeled as such. So recently, I decided, you know what? I'm going to label myself. I'm going to label myself before other people have a chance to. When you label yourself, that's fine. It's when other people try to label you that it becomes a problem. So if I create my own box that I'm stepping into, I have my own labels. I am deaf. I am a woman. I am ADHD. I have autism. I am an oversharer. I am a content creator. That is my box that I created for myself. It's a pretty big box. If you have a box that you want to put yourself in, you have to be mindful of the fact that you might not fit into your box. My box fits me. And so me labeling myself and putting myself in that box is a layer of protection for me. You can label me whatever you want, but I have my labels for myself. I used to struggle with how other people saw me, and then I realized that I have my own labels, and just because other people want to label me, that doesn't mean that I need to embrace those as mine. I label myself, and I embrace that as mine. So that's been a huge part of my journey lately. So I don't encourage people to avoid labels. I say go ahead and label yourself before other people have a chance to. So I mentioned neurodivergence. Neurodivergence is sort of a blanket term that describes people who see the world differently. Different doesn't mean wrong, but for people who have autism or for people who are otherwise neuroatypical, that just means that they see the world differently, but it doesn't mean lesser than. Right? So neurodivergence can be a big umbrella. It could include ADHD, autism, OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. It can include bipolar disorder. That is also considered an element of neurodiversity. Dyslexia is also neurodiversity. All of those fit under that umbrella. So I have ADHD, and I was diagnosed with that when I was 28 years old, which is a little bit later in life. But that is typical for women or girls. They tend to be diagnosed later than boys. There are 3 different types of ADHD. There's hyperactive, there's inattentive, and then there's compliant. So I am inattentive. Boys are typically hyperactive, and that's pretty easy to identify, right? And so that's pretty easy to diagnose. But for girls, for inattentive, it means they're hyper in their heads, and that's something that is easily overlooked. They mentally could be everywhere, but that's something that the adults in their lives might not be able to recognize. So anyway, I was diagnosed at 28. Remember, I grew up mainstreamed, and so I think that was something that it made it easy for people to overlook that potential ADHD diagnosis. If I was ever not paying attention in class, people thought it was because I was deaf and I couldn't hear what was going on in the classroom, not because I had inattentive ADHD. So when I was in elementary school, I had an IEP, which I'm sure all of you all know all about, right? So I had this documented IEP, and so there was some doodling on my papers, right? And so the goal for that doodling was, oh, it's because, for deaf people in school, we allow them to doodle. And it's like, okay, but that has nothing to do with deafness. That is an ADHD thing. And so that's something that got missed because I was deaf. And then, so going to a school for the deaf where everybody is deaf, I wonder if that's something that could have been caught earlier. We can't tell at this point. But, being the only deaf person in a hearing environment, I think it's important that not everything was because I was deaf, but they didn't know that at the time. So at that time, writing back and forth with my family and my doctor, I knew I had ADHD, and so was trying to figure that out. And so that was, communication at the time. We were just kind of writing back and forth. And so the question was like, okay, if I've known this, but you're just waiting for me to prompt the questions about it, is it difficult for me to find out that I have ADHD? It's like, yeah, we write something up and then we refer you to a psychiatrist and then you can get medication. But the medication only lasted for about a month because I found out that I was pregnant and had to stop taking the medication. So didn't go back on that medication. So that was 9 years ago. I didn't take it until like 2 years ago. I ended up getting divorced, got my job, and in my new role, I found that it was really challenging transitioning from a stay-at-home mom to an employee with ADHD. That was really tough for me. I was missing deadlines, and I felt awful because I knew that I was capable of so many things, right? I'm capable, but I just wasn't able to do the things that I was supposed to do. So I remembered that I had this ADHD diagnosis that I had gotten right before I had gotten pregnant. And so I talked with my boss about, the frustration, about their frustration with me not being able to meet deadlines and them feeling like they had to chase me. And so at that point, I decided it was time to go back on that medication. I do still need to come up with strategies to manage my ADHD. And that's part of it too, like coming up with strategies, like identifying routines that really help me, right? Like every morning having the same routine. And if I skip a step in the routine, my whole day feels thrown off, right? And that's something that I've noticed about ADHD. And I still feel like not 100% myself. But then I'm going to start talking about social media and autism here in a second. So I started making content on social media about 2 years ago. And at that time, I did not know that I also had autism. I knew about the ADHD thing, but not autism. And so on social media, I learned a little bit about intermittent fasting. And I decided that I was going to do intermittent fasting, just, weight loss with friends, and share a little bit about it. And I didn't expect that so many people were going to watch what I was posting. And so I had all this stuff going on in my life, right? There was my divorce, and then on my content, I talked a little bit about my marriage, talked about health, talked about trauma. And then my content on social media started to shift a little bit. And so as a result, and I don't know if y'all know how the social media algorithms work, but, whatever I'm talking about is what I will be fed on my social media feeds. And so I started noticing that there was a lot more coming up about health and ADHD, and there was more mention of autism as well. So on my social media feed, I started seeing content by people who both had ADHD and autism, which is referred to as ADHD. It's not an official term, but that's something that we describe ourselves as, ADHD. And I said, I think that sounds like me. And so that doesn't encompass everything that I just mentioned, like the ADHD thing, but when I started looking at autism too, I said, oh, maybe this is me as well. So on my social media journey, that's been really helpful as far as helping me figure out who I am and giving myself that label as I have autism and I have ADHD. And those labels are great because they help me understand myself a little bit more. They give me some stronger footing on who I am. And so for people who don't understand me, I can just say, I'm neurodiverse. I see the world differently from you. And I accept that label. In fact, I embrace that label. It's very important to me. So that would have been 2.5 years ago now. And I said, yeah, that's me. I think that's me. So saw a therapist, brought it up, that I think I might have autism. And it was sort of with ADHD, I don't know, with autism, I felt like I didn't know how to react, but I asked the questions, got referred to psych again, got the official diagnosis, which was last summer, and that was very new to me. So on that journey, on my social media journey, I now talk a lot about neurodiversity as a deaf woman. And since this is Women's History Month, and next month is Autism Acceptance Month, April 2nd, I think, is Autism Awareness Day. So in this month, I can celebrate both being a woman and being neurodiverse. So like I said, labels for me, I am a deaf woman, I have ADHD and autism. And that has nothing to do with other people, right? That's me. And so that means I finally figured out who I am. 100%? No, absolutely not. But the door has been open for me to figure out who I am separate from others in my life. And so I want to share with you a little bit about what's come up for me on social media, right? Because hearing people speak, I'm glad that there's an opportunity to have captions and transcripts, but not always. And so learning about who I am and figuring out what I want to share in sign language has been really important to me. I found out that people that I connect with have had similar experiences, right? And so people are saying, finally, somebody is talking about this. And it's been a way to establish community, right? And so that's the point of all of this, is building community. And so that began my thought on belonging. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Belonging. There's a difference between belonging and fitting in. So what's the difference, right? Belonging and fitting in. This is me asking. Any thoughts? Just some guesses. I'll ask you again. What's the difference between belonging and fitting in?
So fitting in is trying to conform, trying to kind of force yourself to fit into a certain group and make those changes to people, maybe the box. But belonging would be true and honest expression of themselves, really showing who you are fully. You come as you are, and you don't really care about any of the other people's views on you.
Great, presentation done. You got it covered. Fantastic. No, really, we got more? What do you think?
Fitting in is forcing. Belonging is natural and organic.
I love that. That was beautifully put, right? Belonging is when you are accepted for who you are. Fitting in is when you are accepted for trying to be like everybody else. I think my whole life I felt like I've had to fit in, and that piece of belonging has been missing. But for me, as I'm getting older, I realized that fitting in is not the goal. And so I've been transitioning from trying to fit in to trying to experience belonging. I think as a kid, I always wanted to fit in, and that was sort of a survival mechanism, right? But as I get older, belonging has become much more important to me. And especially as I've embraced my neurodiversity and really standing in that, I don't care so much about fitting in because I've finally found somewhere that I belong. And another layer of that, like I think often people try to figure out where they're going to find belonging. And if that answer is clear to you, great. Focus on that. Focus on sharing who you are with the community that you belong to authentically, right? And continue to share who you are. And if you don't have that community yet, that community will find you because you're being yourself. Sometimes if we keep seeking it out, it's going to be really hard, right? It's going to be impossible. But if you just focus on living your authentic self, one day you're going to realize that you belong. And that's where I'm finding myself right now. I finally belong, and it is such a good feeling. So again, labels are really important to me. So I want to challenge you to think about your labels. Like I mentioned before, other people labeling you is going to be tough. But I think when we label ourselves, that can be very empowering as far as embracing who we are. So I want to talk about endings and beginnings. Not beginnings and endings, but endings and beginnings. Endings can be a mixture of relief and other feelings. I told you that I'm divorced, right? And that's something that I felt relief about, right? I was so grateful when it was over. But I was still hurting because that life that I lived for so long was suddenly not there anymore, right? And it felt very abrupt. And that reality that I lived for so long was just not there anymore. And so I felt a mixture of aching and relief. But I was also relieved that I could move on to a new beginning, right? A new job, a new label, a new identity. I could be something different in this world. And so for me, endings are always good. I always look forward to endings because that means that change is coming, right? And I can go into the unknown. And remember, the topic for tonight is about growing in the unknown. And endings mean we don't necessarily know what's going to happen next. And that is where we have the most opportunity to grow, especially if we jump in feet first. For me, being a content creator, right? That's something I never dreamed that I would do, but I tried it, right? And now I'm here tonight with all of you. And if I didn't just try, if I didn't just take that step and embrace a new beginning, I wouldn't be here right now. So I guess I have a few challenges for you tonight, right? We talked about labels, we talked about your why, we talked about belonging. So now I want you to figure out what your next beginning is, right? We have so many opportunities for beginnings, and we can do multiple at the same time. So what are your next beginnings? Feeling feelings. This is fairly personal to me. I am a fairly sensitive person. Through my ADHD diagnosis, I learned that emotions are really tough for me to regulate. I know that I have a tendency to overreact, and so feeling feelings is really tough for me. So sometimes I have to remind myself that if I'm feeling something, I have to bask in it a little bit, right? I have to absorb and recognize my feelings. I have to name it. I have to experience it. And then I gotta let it go, right? So I'm gonna talk a little bit about depression. So there's a quote, and it says, "The opposite of depression is expression." I think often people think the opposite of depression is happiness or joy, and it's not. It's expression. And that's because you have something that is leaving your body, and it's no longer staying in your body and bringing you down, right? So when you're depressed, when you're experiencing depression, you feel sick. And so when you express it, you're getting that sickness out of you. So I've experienced depression with some of my life challenges, and I started writing, I started thinking about it, I did social media, I started writing a little bit of poetry, and that was incredibly healing for me. I think it's really important that you find a way to express yourself, whether that's talking to people, or vlogging, or writing, or dancing, or doing art, whatever it is you need to do to get it out. And that doesn't mean that other people need to see it, but if all you're doing is feeling feelings, there will be a time that you have to let those feelings go. It is important to feel them, but then you have to let them go. If you suppress the feelings, then they will always be there, and they will always be building in your body and making you sick. When you let those feelings go, they're out of your body and no longer making you sick. Sorry, my notes are a little bit all over the place. All right, so we talked about belonging, we talked about fitting in. Okay, I want to ask you a question. Can you think about one time where you felt like you really belonged in a community, whether it was here on campus or anywhere, in your home? Can you think about a time where you really felt like you belonged? And how did that feel? Anybody willing to share? I see some people are not interested in sharing. And that's fine. You don't have to share. This can be an inside thought activity, right? But I want you to think about when you felt like you belonged versus fitting in. Unmasking. So when I am out in the world, I'm trying to figure out, am I masked or am I unmasked? It's really important for me to be able to look at myself as a person instead of who I am when I meet other people and trying to meet their expectations. So for my first big girl job out of grad school, I was working with an interpreting agency in Maryland. And so we were chatting, and I couldn't remember what we talked about. I couldn't remember what I said, but I do remember that I said something, and somebody said, "Don't be a wet blanket." And I think I knew what that meant, but seeing that said in that situation, I didn't understand why. So then I had to Google, like, wet blanket? What? And so at that time, remember, I didn't know that I had autism. And I was like, okay, wet blanket. I remember. So I don't remember what I said, but I do remember saying something because I remember feeling like, yes, I finally have something to say. I finally have something to contribute. And so I think maybe, like, I don't know if the comment was critical, but like, I did say something and then I felt immediately shot down afterwards. And now, looking back on that situation, I know that there are, especially for neurotypical people, sometimes they miss, for neurodiverse people, sometimes they miss tone, sometimes they miss some social cues. And so in that moment, it was a huge impact on my life that I didn't realize why I got the reaction that I did. And now, I recognize my diagnosis and I realize that I think I unmasked myself a little bit. And so looking back on that situation, I understand it a little bit better now. Unmasking is not just for you, it's also for me, right? I unmask myself to myself as well. I made this slide last week. And today, as I was walking in, and I think I saw this at like one of the bus stops, like I saw this quote. And I just talked about that experience, that wet blanket experience, and I don't remember what they said. I don't remember what I said. It was like, 15 years ago? But I do remember how I felt. And that was a tough experience, but I did take something positive from it, right? People might not remember what they say, but they are going to remember how you made them feel. Words are important, but feelings matter even more. And when you feel belonging, that is so important, and you never forget having that feeling. So I already talked about this a little bit, but I don't know if the sign authenticity, as I've seen it before, fits. Authenticity, because I do think some people are not authentic, like they're being real but not authentic. I don't know. So I'm gonna assign authenticity different. So authenticity, and I think some of us know the meaning of that word, but not everybody is my cup of tea, right? I am not everybody's cup of tea. In fact, I don't even like tea. I'm more of a coffee person, if we're being honest. But we are all here in this room together, right? We're probably not all 100% to each other. We are some individuals in this room, but we can all be here, right? We can all be here in this room together, knowing that we are different people. Y'all look beautiful tonight, right? This is great. And I think this is really important. And again, it's gonna help you feel belonging. So this is in relation to my oversharing. I like to talk about what I think. I like to share what I think. And people have approached me saying that they have had the same experience. And especially when I talk about ADHD and autism, or when I talk about my divorce or my experience with intermittent fasting. For me, that is the most brave thing I can do for myself, is to share my experiences. That can start a domino effect for other opportunities. And so if I'm brave enough to share, that can be beneficial to others. And I hope you find your bravery as well. Vulnerability. Sometimes people make the sign for vulnerability like weakness, and I don't like that. So I'm going to use a different sign. Vulnerability. It's kind of a weird thing for me because I talked about my tendency to overshare, and I don't love vulnerability. I do like to speak the truth, but I get what is called a vulnerability hangover sometimes. Sometimes I am so vulnerable and then I think that I maybe said the wrong thing or said not enough of something or said too much of something, or I maybe should have said something differently, and that is exhausting and it feels a little bit like a hangover. So sometimes people call it a vulnerability hangover. There's an author, Brené Brown, and I love her work. And she talks a little bit about feeling. And so one of her terms that she came up with is like a vulnerability hangover. And I identified with that, right? And it's like, I'm vulnerable and that's great, but I don't always feel great after. It's like a hangover, right? Sometimes as a result of that openness and that sharing, you feel a little bit hungover. It happens to all of us. It happens to me, but that doesn't stop me from being vulnerable. I'm still going to do it. So I think when I have a chance to be vulnerable, or when you all have a chance to be vulnerable, it's probably a good idea to check in with yourself afterwards, right? Sometimes you might feel a little bit of grief, maybe a little bit of embarrassment. It's important to check in with people after they're vulnerable. Like, I'm up here tonight, I'm sharing. It's a good thing that I have a lot of training and a lot of practice with my confidence, but after this, I'm gonna go to that hotel and I am going to think about whether I maybe shared too much. But that's me. That's just who I am, right? I know I'm always sharing too much. What are you going to do? Who has heard of the concept of a glimmer before? It might be new. Yeah, glimmer. Yes. So I'm using the sign glimmer, not coming out, but coming towards your body. I think of it as the opposite of a trigger, right? So it's produced similarly. So this started in a trauma healing community as a way for people who are struggling with trauma or PTSD or experiences in their lives to actively seek out moments that bring joy. Not like big, extravagant awards or anything like that. That's not a glimmer. Glimmers can be little things, like light coming through the window of a car where the sun warms you, or a cat purring as I'm holding it in my lap. That's a glimmer. That little moment of joy. Sometimes they can be little micro moments, just interspersed throughout your day, but they can add up. And they can really help you feel better. So again, another challenge for you is, where can you find your glimmers? I want everybody to go glimmer hunting. You know that theory, the red car theory, right? Like, if you think about a red car, you're gonna start seeing red cars everywhere, right? I think the same thing applies to glimmers. When you start looking for glimmers, you are going to see them everywhere. And the reason why I bring it up is because it's so important. So like I said, this started in a trauma healing community, trying to find glimmers. And then it became prevalent in the neurodivergent community as well. Because we have a lot of sensory ability. And I think that glimmers, I've noticed, like with the five senses, right? Taste, touch, smell, like feeling warmth on your body, that kind of thing. Maybe not so much with taste, I don't know, but feeling, sound, sight, smell, those kind of sensory experiences can lead to glimmers. I know that sometimes people feel overstimulated, right? There's a lot of visual stimulation in the world. Like up here, there's a lot of lights on me. I have to remind myself to calm down every once in a while, but there are still ways to find your glimmer. So for me, and for you, glimmer can be very personal. For me as a neurodiverse person, glimmer is something that makes me feel sort of happy or calm in a moment. If I'm feeling lost or feeling unsure of how the world is operating or how to navigate a situation, I focus on a small moment, a small glimmer, and just bask in the glow for just a minute. And then I am able to find my center. And that's one of my strategies when I'm feeling overwhelmed or nervous or overstimulated in some way. If I just need to like shut things off for a moment, focus on a glimmer, and then I can go back to what I was doing, whatever I was doing before. And so that can be a really good tip for you. Go glimmer hunting. I do write things down in a journal, and if I find a new glimmer, I will write it down. And then that becomes one of my glimmers, right? Journaling is a glimmer. Funny how that works, huh? Okay, we're going to be wrapping up soon. But I do want to talk about being a beginner. Because a lot of people ask me how I got started with content creation. And I always respond with, I'm not sure how it happened. I try to post something, and it just snowballed. But if you want to start something, and it feels awkward, it feels new, you should be able to have fun and play and learn and make mistakes. The competency will come. I mean, on social media, looking back, some of the things that I did, it's out there on the internet, but that's where I started. And it's great to see my journey so far. But you have to be a beginner at the beginning, right? Jump on TikTok trends. I'm deaf. I obviously can't do anything involving sound, but I've tried different strategies, and I found what works for me. I figured out my style, right? I figured out my lane, my voice. And so I kind of started there. And don't go in with a goal of being competent from the very beginning, because you're going to set yourself up for failure. You have to start in the sandbox and kind of play around a little bit. It's always a process of having fun and learning, right? So those that are the best in their field or professional athletes, if they are talking with beginners and they share advice, one of the things that really helped me as well is not going in feeling like you can compete against the best of the best, but going in as a new person and just sort of inviting yourself into that space and being a beginner and just sort of playing around in that world and see where you fit in. You never know what you're going to learn, and you never know where that journey is going to take you. It's so interesting to see where you end up. But start being a beginner. Don't be afraid to try new things. And that applies to social media and other aspects of life too. I still feel like there are so many things that I need to learn and that I need to work on. New exciting things coming, of course, but looking back at the beginning, it seems like it wasn't so bad. Just make sure you have fun with it. I saw another Audre Lorde quote on campus today. Beautiful timing, really. So, just the synergy of everything. It's so great. So we talked about unmasking. Honestly, I'm not afraid anymore. I used to be afraid. And so I didn't want to follow a manual to life, right? I wanted to create my own manual. I am deliberate and afraid of nothing. I want to do this, therefore I will do it. If there's something that I'm really passionate about, I'm going to go for it. So everything I've shared about myself up until now, I have to tell you, I'm not where I thought I would be. Maybe I thought I would be doing this as a side job just to keep myself busy as I was raising kids, and now here we are. This is all still very unknown to me. I felt like I wasn't growing in my previous work, but now I feel like I'm really growing. So I'm excited to see what comes next. So for students, especially for those who are graduating soon, I know that this can be really exciting. It can also be scary, not knowing, but it can give you a lot of surprising and fun things to look forward to. For you and for me too, I think the same thing. So that's my what I want to share with you tonight. Is thinking about how you can grow in the unknown, be authentic, be vulnerable. And that's my hope for all of you tonight. Be true to who you are, and maybe start challenging yourself to think about your why, think about your labels, and speak from the heart. I just want to check on how we're doing. Thank you so much for your presentation. We really learned so much from you. So now go ahead and mask, and we can have people ask questions from the audience. Yes, please stand. It's tough for me to see.
Yeah, it's hard to see you signing, so if you could stand, please. Please stand. Yes, please stand. Thank you. So the person that's sitting in front of you, I can't see their sign, so we good? I want to ask everyone if you could see us on the camera. Okay, great. So every time you finish signing something and you see something on your content with like Instagram and you close with a wink, I wonder why that is.
To be honest with you, I'm not sure. I started doing that, and I guess it's become my signature, right? I felt like I needed to find a thing that is me, and I think that might be it. There's no exciting reason behind it, sorry.
Any other questions? Okay, over here. So, like deaf companies and being involved in the deaf community, going to deaf schools, I'm curious about, your immersion in the deaf community and your perspective on how big or small the deaf community is. I'm afraid of being myself, but I know that the deaf community can be rather small.
So remember, I grew up in a mainstream environment, but I did have parents who were deaf, so I did feel as though I was part of that community. Honestly, I think that the deaf community being small makes it a little bit easier for me to be myself. I never really thought of it that way. But I feel like the deaf community is more accepting of one another because we are so small, right? I think that we value each other, and that's really been my experience. I mean, I understand different perspectives. I feel like in the hearing community, there's acceptance, but not necessarily understanding, With the deaf community, they understand. And they understand what it's like to be different. And I think that not everybody in the hearing community does. But in the deaf community, we are already different, right? We already experience communication barriers. We already have that layer. And so because of that, I felt like it was easier to be accepted in the deaf community.
Sure, Hugh over here. So you mentioned that you went to college and you got a master's degree. How did you approach your neurodivergence and with accommodations for classes and things like that? How did you do that in your experience?
So I did go to college before I got my diagnosis. So I had a lot of deadlines, and I had a lot of structure that I needed to follow, right? If I didn't have a deadline to follow, I probably would have been spinning my wheels a little bit. And so because I had the structure and the deadlines, that was something that helped keep me on pace. If I had a class where there was no deadline, or if I were auditing a class, that's harder for me to keep up with the work. I know, weird.
So deadlines, it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, so with a class schedule, that's more structured. So with work, if I have a meeting and then some days I have 7 meetings, that is harder. The academic schedule is a little bit more, there's a little bit more structure to it. In the marketing field, because everything is different every day, it can be a lot harder. But with classes, there's some stability and structure there, so that makes it a little bit easier to stay on top of things.
Yes, you over here. So when you started your journey with your identity, how did you feel about your different labels about yourself and your passion and how that acclimated with your life?
It felt, oh my gosh, here it is finally, right? It felt a sense of relief that I was finally able to share, and I felt like I wasn't wrong, right? I had a label that worked for me, and so I embraced it. It's my jewelry. I've always had this jewelry growing up, and so it's why is that? It's that's who I am. I like having different jewelry, and I like being able to show, I like that label for myself because, it's not like working for a company and representing that company. It's just me, right? That label is just me. And so that brings a different layer of excitement to it.
Yes, Steve over here. So I'm curious about what kind of work that you tend to do with your marketing work.
Right. So I was the director of strategy and incentives. So my job focused on strategy for customers and also for the company. So there was all kinds of different work, like traditional marketing to digital advertising. There was some video creation. There was a little bit of web design and development. There was some event marketing, operations, really everything under the sun, A to Z, for different customers. And so that was a great job for a person with ADHD who is also medicated.
I remember when I saw a video of yours maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago about, that was about when I was exposed to your content, and I was very inspired. And now knowing about your neurodivergence, being ADHD and autism, and going back to seeing your old content and feel that that's like an old chapter?
That's a great question. So I am still doing intermittent fasting. I don't really talk about it a lot. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nutritionist. So it used to be something that I just talked about with friends, but as my audience got bigger, I didn't want to seem like I was giving medical advice. People asked me about it, and I felt like I wasn't the right person to be sharing that kind of information. So I decided to set up a private account, but you have to request to follow me on that one. So the one where I talk about intermittent fasting is private, and so I don't share about that on my larger platform anymore because I wanted to keep those audiences separate.
Yes, you over here. So what is your best strategy for neurodivergent people on how to get through anything, like your top tip? Like your best strategy to overcome things in your life and feeling different and trying to fit in. How do you overcome that sort of feeling?
Interested that you use the word fitting in. I don't think about fitting in, but I think it's interesting that you're asking about fitting in. So my advice would be to find other neurodiverse people, right? There is a spectrum of neurodiversity, but we all get it, right? We all kind of see our people and know our people and gather a sense of belonging, right? Belonging,
over here.
not fitting in.
I'm sorry, can you repeat? I missed your spelling for something. So I've seen your content. So female with ADHD and an autistic female. So are they like similar or like a playlist?
So my autism diagnosis is new for me, so I don't necessarily know the statistics on men and women with autism. I do know that there are some differences with ADHD, though.
So I know that there's a correlation. It seems that there's between women that are autistic and have ADHD, and there's a correlation with that, especially in my family.
Thank you for letting me know. That's definitely something to look into.
Yes, over here. So I want to go back to the story about your triggers and related to your job. And I myself have an ADHD diagnosis, and maybe this applies and can help or maybe not. But I've noticed that with triggers, I don't like open-ended questions because there's too many options and you can overthink and it would just lead to a meltdown. So I try to mention, for people to use closer parameters when it comes to questions that they have for me, so I can have specific options and it's easier to decide from that point on. And I'm not sure if that will help or not, but that's just my tip.
Yeah, ADHD, is, I think sometimes people experience what's called all or nothing thinking, right? Black and white, and they don't really consider shades of gray. And so I think it's easier to have those options, but also important to remember that life is not black and white, but sometimes in the ADHD brain, it is black and white. In the neurotypical world, there are more shades of gray.
Yeah, it's either 100% or nothing, right? Yeah.
Right? No in between.
Do it or not.
Yep.
Yes, so we have another question over here. Can you stand up, please? So
So how do you know when you have hit the ending of an experience, right? Like when we're talking about feelings, we talked about like you feel your feelings and then you let go of them. I think it can be different. So for me, healing cannot happen without talking about that experience. And I'm still in the process of healing, like it's not 100% done. But healing can happen over a series of time. But like when you asked about realizing when you're healed from something. I don't know. I think in the past when I experienced depression, I felt better after sort of getting it out of my system. I think healing from trauma might be a little bit of a different story.
So with your recent diagnosis of autism and being someone with an ADHD diagnosis, like how do you feel now compared to when you received those diagnoses?
Honestly, I wish I knew prior. I think that life would have been different. My job could have been different. My educational experience could have been different. My choices for school, I admit that I sort of went with the flow. and didn't really think about what was going to be the best fit for me. If I had known about my neurodiversity as a younger child, I don't know, but I did wish I knew, so I had the option to do something about it when I was younger.
So now you are experiencing growth in the unknown, and you can look back at your inner child and your time when you were in your 20s and see your journey and what you went through. And you can have that discussion with your kids and their inner child.
Huh. That's a great question. I guess we would just go back to the beginning, right? I mean, when I think about playing with my kids, I try to find fun things in life. I mean, to make them happy. I want to do things that they enjoy doing. But I think if you find your inner child, try to connect with it again. You know, I would say to everyone, start playing, whatever that looks like for you. You know, whatever you learn is going to help, you know, to learn your why. Try out different things and figure out what fits. You can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again, because then you'll never grow and you'll never heal. But if you try new things, like, you know, for me, volunteering for new organizations, giving myself new opportunities, that's where the growth happens.
So I have another question about being vulnerable. So I know a lot of people can be like, whoa, you're giving too much information. But like, what is your thoughts about being vulnerable?
So I think maybe neurotypical people don't share as much because that's more the societal expectation. And so people have told me that I overshare, but it feels right to me. I don't feel like I'm oversharing. So that's somebody else's perception of what I'm doing. Obviously, you have to have lines that you're not willing to go across, but I don't feel like there's anything wrong with what I'm doing, so that's kind of where I'm at.
So the word overshare, what does that mean? Like community content, like contextually, what does that mean?
So some people think I put too much information out there and that I should be keeping some things private. For example, autism. And I think that that's become more of an accepted thing to talk about lately. But when I talk about stimming, like what I do for stimming, and if I talk about that, people might get uncomfortable that I'm sharing. And I'm not sure what I'm sharing that's making people uncomfortable, but that is where the concept of oversharing comes from, because I share things and other people become uncomfortable. Hopefully nobody was uncomfortable tonight. Are we comfortable? Great.
All right, so this is going to be the last question. Anybody want to ask our very last question? Anyone? Yes, over here. So I'm curious about your experience with medication, like being on it, being off it. How does that impact with how you interact with the world and your emotions? Coming to accept yourself, how did that impact?
So I've been on medication now for about 2 years, and I don't take it every day. I take it like during the work week, but not on weekends. That medication really forces me to think of other strategies to manage. So the ADHD medication is actually a stimulant, so it keeps me focused. But I can get that hyper focus without the medication. And I think sometimes neurotypical people, if they were to take the medication, you know, that would have a different effect. So for me, I feel like when I'm on it, I can manage my focus okay. When I am off the medication, so like I said, on the weekends, I can be a little bit of a foggy person. It's the best way I can describe it. I'm just like in a bit of a fog sometimes. How I react emotionally is sometimes not appropriate. I do struggle with that off the medication. On the medication, it's manageable. I do try to see sometimes if I can not take it and develop some of those strategies and management techniques. And so that's something that I might try to experiment with. But I'm not really sure yet.
Yeah, you just have to find out what's right and what works for you.
Right.
All right, so that was the actual last question. I had nothing to add. I just wanted to, say something with that. With my experience, like maybe it will help, maybe it won't. I too overshare, and I also am on some medication. I notice sometimes I feel like sharp-witted and I can function and it's great, but right after I'm done with that, I just have a crash. So a lot of energy has just been depleted and my body just feels wonky and it just doesn't feel normal. And I thought like maybe I shouldn't do it every day, but I see how to take it as needed, and sometimes I won't take it. And sometimes it's just not the right day for my body to take it. But the concept of like your body is on like 24/7, like around the clock, just hyper working, that medicine like forces the body to not feel normal and not natural. So that's just my little tidbit there.
Yeah. I don't know that I've experienced that crash. I mean, I do crash, but that is maybe figuring out the right dosage to prevent the crash. And so that can be managed with medication. So honestly, I don't experience the same crash like the one that you're talking about. For me, it's more like a brain fog, but it's not like an energy crash. So I don't know. I assume that probably not all neurodiverse people experience the same thing. For me, it might just be different from what it is for you.
Yeah, it's different for everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Your presentation was amazing. I learned so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before you leave, we do have a gift for you. Oh, of
Thank
course.
you.
Oh, of course. You're welcome.
Yes, you know me. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate everything you did. I learned a lot from you, and I've made a lot of connections with things that you were saying in your presentation. So I'm going to go home and analyze myself.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for having me, and thank you for being so great.
Awesome. Yay. We're going to take a group photo. The SLT staff up here for a photo.
I'll be the stand-in. It's all good. Eh, Meaning everybody who was here tonight? Okay. Everybody who is here tonight, we are going to take another group picture. All y'all, up here. Everybody up. Everybody. Yes, I said everybody. That means you. Get up here. Everybody. Everybody. Hey, I still see people in the audience that are not on stage, and I think I told you to get on stage. Everybody. Everybody, come on. It's a photo opportunity. Come on, everybody. Everybody up. Are we ready? No, we're not ready. I see people. All right, we're just going to go for it. Again, 1, 2, 3. Fantastic. Thank you.
Oh my God.